Hello dear friends, welcome to the Rooted Voice US. Today we will tell you about the highway stretched like an old scar through the country, a ribbon of cracked asphalt humming beneath the weight of the evening heat. The sun was dragging its last gold across the pines, and the sky above Alabama shimmered with a kind of orange that makes you forget the world can ever turn cruel. A convoy of motorcycles roared in a thunderous rhythm that carried dust and music through the humid air. They called themselves the Iron Promise, 10 riders strong, faces half hidden behind goggles and dust, hearts chained together by years of road and shared salvation. To some they looked dangerous, men and women carved from leather and steel, but to each other they were something closer to a family patched together by loss, loyalty, and the belief that the open road could heal what the world had broken. Reggie Coleman led the pack, the kind of man whose silence spoke louder than sermons. He rode for peace, though peace rarely lasted long around him. Tonight the ride had no destination, only a feeling, the need to outrun, memory, to feel the wind burn away the weight of old sins. Behind him, Maya kept her distance, but watched his back like she always did. The engine's song filled the dusk until, somewhere past mile marker 88, Reggie saw a flicker near the guardrail, a small shape crouched in the dirt. At first it looked like trash, something tossed from a truck. But when the dying light bent across the shape, he saw movement. A head turning slowly, a tiny glint that caught the beam of his headlight. Reggie's gut clenched. He throttled down, tires screaming as gravel spat from under his boots. The rest of the riders followed suit, their engines stuttering into uneasy silence. In that sudden stillness, the highway felt too wide, the world too quiet. The air was thick with the smell of oil and pine sap and something else, fear. Reggie removed his gloves and took a few cautious steps forward. The others stayed close, their bodies instinctively forming a half circle, protective but uncertain. At the edge of the road sat a little girl, maybe 6 years old, barefoot, her thin legs drawn up under a dirty pink dress. Her small fingers clutched at a stuffed rabbit missing one eye. Her skin was dusted gray from the road, and her hair stuck to her cheeks in messy curls damp with tears. She looked up at Reggie, and the way her eyes shimmered, wide, lost, too old for her age, made the air catch in his throat. "Hey, baby girl," he said softly, lowering his voice to something between a whisper and a prayer. "You okay? You hurt?" The girl didn't answer. She tucked her chin to her knees, trembling. Maya stepped forward carefully, one hand raised, her leather vest creaking in the heat. "Sweetheart," she said, her voice tender, "where's your mama? You out here alone?" The little girl sniffled, her lips parting as if words were something heavy she had to lift. "Can't find her," she murmured, barely audible. The words fell like stones. Reggie crouched lower, resting one knee in the gravel. "Can't find who, baby?" The girl's small hand wiped her face, leaving streaks of dust across her cheeks. "Ma." Behind Reggie, the bikers shifted uneasily. It wasn't every day you found a child sitting alone on a rural highway at sunset. Something about it felt wrong. Not just sad, but wrong in a way that prickled their instincts. Reggie swallowed hard. "What's your name?" he asked. "Talia," she whispered. "Okay, Talia," he said gently. "You see all them bikes back there? That's my family. We don't hurt kids, and we don't leave folks behind. You safe now, all right?" Her eyes flickered from face to face, landing on Maya, the only woman. She hesitated, then reached out her hand, small and trembling. Maya knelt and took it carefully, feeling the chill of the girl's skin despite the heavy heat of the evening. The contact made Talia's shoulders loosen just slightly. Maya smiled. "You hungry, baby?" she asked. Talia nodded once, almost imperceptibly. "All right," Maya said, glancing at Reggie. "We got snacks in the saddlebags. Let's get her some water." Reggie signaled to one of the younger riders, Big Tone, who hurried back to the bikes. The others stayed alert, eyes scanning the tree line and the long stretch of road behind them. Something didn't sit right. No car nearby, no sign of a wreck, no footprints except the girl's small ones in the dust. When Tone returned with a bottle of water and a half-crushed granola bar, Talia reached out timidly. Her hand shook as she unscrewed the cap, taking slow sips like someone afraid of wasting anything. Maya brushed a strand of hair from her forehead. "Where you from, sweetheart?" she asked. Talia shrugged. "Don't know." "Where your mama last time you saw her?" Talia looked toward the woods on the other side of the guardrail. Her voice was thin, a thread about to break. "She told me to run." The words froze everyone in place. Reggie's hand tightened on his knee. He exchanged a quick glance with Maya, then stood and scanned the tree line. The pines stood dark and dense, whispering secrets to the wind. "She told you to run from what?" Maya asked softly. The girl looked down. "The man," she said. "The man." The simplicity of it made the air grow colder. Reggie motioned for two of the bikers to stay with Maya and Talia while he and the others walked toward the woods. They didn't go far, just enough to check for movement, for any sign of another person. But the forest answered only with silence and the occasional chirp of crickets. Back at the shoulder, Maya wrapped Talia in her denim jacket. The child's lips trembled, and when she spoke again, it was almost to herself. "He said, Mama was bad. He said we had to go. But Mama pushed me and told me to run." Her words came in bursts, as if replaying the moment in fragments. Reggie's chest tightened. He had seen rough things in his life. Accidents, fights, war stories. But this was different. There was something sacred about a child's fear. Something that demanded protection like an oath. He took a step closer, lowering his tone. "Talia, did you see where your mama went?" She shook her head slowly. She screamed. Maya looked up sharply. She screamed, "What, baby?" Talia's small hand clutched the rabbit tighter. She screamed my name. Then I heard. She stopped, pressing her lips together. "He was mad. Real mad. Real mad." A shiver ran down Reggie's back. The forest, once only shadows, now seemed to watch them. He turned to his crew. "We ain't leaving her here. We'll take her back to town, get the cops." But the thought of turning the girl over to strangers, cold rooms, questions she couldn't answer, made something inside him resist. Maybe it was the way she flinched whenever a male voice rose too loud, or how she clung to Maya's arm like a lifeline. Reggie nodded to himself. "First we make sure she's safe, then we find out what the hell happened." They gathered around, forming a shield against the dark. The highway stretched empty in both directions, miles of silence. Maya lifted Talia onto her bike, wrapping an extra bandana around her small head to keep the wind from stinging her face. Reggie mounted up beside them. The engines growled to life, echoing off the trees like thunder rolling over a churchyard. As the convoy pulled away, Talia's tiny hands gripped Maya's vest. The girl didn't cry anymore. She just stared ahead, eyes wide and unblinking, as if afraid of what would happen if she blinked and the world disappeared again. The road back toward town cut through open fields, past ghostly barns and rusted mailboxes leaning at odd angles. Night crept in fast. Headlights stretched long white beams into the dark, illuminating patches of fog. At one point, Maya felt Talia's small body tremble against her back. She reached one hand behind, resting it gently on the child's knee. "You okay, baby?" Talia nodded against her shoulder. "Cold," she whispered. Maya squeezed her knee lightly. "Almost there, sweetheart." Behind them, Reggie kept glancing at his mirrors. Every so often, he thought he saw headlights flicker far behind them, too steady to be random. Maybe just another traveler. Maybe not. By the time they rolled into the small town of Eldridge, the street lights buzzed like tired fireflies. The local diner's neon sign blinked weakly, open 24 hours. Reggie motioned for everyone to pull in. The bikes idled in a row, chrome catching the glow. Inside the diner, the air smelled of coffee and bacon grease. A couple of truckers turned their heads as 10 bikers walked in with a small, barefoot child in tow, but nobody said a word. The waitress, a middle-aged woman with tired eyes and a kind smile, stopped wiping a counter and frowned. "Lord, what happened to her?" Maya answered quietly. "Found her by the highway." The woman's expression softened into something maternal. "You poor thing. Come sit down, sweetheart." She hurried to bring a blanket and a cup of warm milk. Talia sipped carefully, eyes darting around the room. When the waitress asked if they'd called the police, Reggie shook his head. "Not yet," he said. "We'll handle it." The woman looked like she wanted to argue, but something in Reggie's tone stopped her. The bikers filled the booth, shielding Talia from view. The girl's shoulders relaxed slightly in the warm light, and she started to speak again, haltingly, about the whisper, the one she said made the bad man freeze. But before she could finish, a low hum grew outside, a car engine idling. Reggie's eyes met Maya's. The night wasn't done with them yet. The Iron Promise had not started as a club. It began as 3 men riding away from different kinds of wreckage, bound together by silence and asphalt. Over the years, their circle widened, until it became what it was now. A tribe of 10 riders who trusted the sound of each other's engines more than most people trust a handshake. Each of them carried ghosts. Reggie had been a paramedic in Birmingham, the kind who stayed behind after the ambulances pulled away, unable to shake the faces that never made it. Maya had once been a social worker, fiery and fearless, until a case turned violent and left her doubting the system she had served. Big Tone was a mechanic who could fix anything but his own loneliness. Jace and Lenny were brothers who rode because the road was the only place they didn't fight. Each person wore the same black patch with the silver wheel wrapped in roots. Their symbol, a promise that no one's pain would be left behind on the roadside again. They called themselves Iron for strength and promise, for what they swore to each other. If someone was down, the rest would stop, always. For most towns they passed through, the sight of their convoy meant trouble. But the locals didn't see the quiet acts that defined them. Fixing a stranger's flat tire without a word, dropping groceries at the door of a widow who'd lost her pension, escorting a runaway teen safely home. They rode rough, spoke rougher, but carried a code older than any law. The road watches those who watch out for others. Tonight, that code was being tested. Talia's presence in their midst changed the hum of the group. Normally, after a long ride, they'd banter, tease, brag about the miles. Now the air inside the diner felt like the moment before thunder. Maya kept Talia beside her in the booth, letting the girl lean against her side. Reggie sat at the end, scanning the window while pretending to read the menu. The others filled the spaces between with quiet conversations that never rose above murmurs. When the waitress poured coffee, the steam curled into the low light and hung there like unspoken worry. Reggie studied his crew. Every one of them had been hardened by something, yet they looked at the girl the way men look at something fragile that reminds them of home. He remembered his daughter, gone now, long gone, and how she used to reach for his beard when she was small. For a moment, the memory felt too heavy, so he turned his eyes back to the road outside. The headlights that had followed them earlier were gone, replaced by the usual nighttime calm. Still, his instincts twitched. Years of emergency work had taught him that quiet often came right before the worst kind of noise. Maya broke the silence. "She trusts women more," she said softly, watching Talia trace a finger around the edge of her cup. "I'll stay with her tonight. We can sort the rest in the morning." Reggie nodded, grateful for her steadiness. There had always been something unshakable about Maya. She carried a calm that even roaring engines couldn't drown out. She believed in the road's redemption, that people could find themselves out there between the white lines if they rode far enough. Reggie believed it too, though lately the road had given him more questions than peace. The bikers' stories intertwined in that booth like tangled roots. Each of them had once been lost: addiction, grief, betrayal. But on two wheels, they had found motion when the world stood still. They rode for therapy more than thrill. Sometimes, when night swallowed the highway and the only sound was the hum of the engines, they felt like they were writing invisible prayers across the dark. No preacher, no confession. Booth, just speed and honesty. The road didn't lie. It gave back exactly what you put into it. Outside the diner windows, the neon sign flickered from open to ope, buzzing faintly. Cars rolled by every few minutes, their lights cutting brief white paths across the lot. Reggie's mind kept circling the same thought. How does a child end up alone on a highway with no shoes, no blood on her, no wreck nearby, no witnesses? Every logical thread frayed as soon as he tried to pull it. Maya noticed his frown. Whatever she saw out there, she said quietly, "She's holding it in. If we push too fast, we'll lose her trust." Hoare nodded again. "Tomorrow," he said. "We figure it out tomorrow." When they left the diner, the night had cooled. The stars hung heavy and low, their light catching on the chrome bikes like sparks. They rode toward an old motel on the edge of town, a place that didn't ask questions and took cash. Inside, the room smelled of detergent and faint cigarette smoke, but the beds were clean. Maya settled Talia into the room closest to hers, leaving the bathroom light on to chase away the dark corners. The rest of the crew gathered outside under the humming street lamp, voices low. Jace leaned against his handlebars. "You think the cops should know now?" Reggie shook his head. "Not till we talk to her again. Too many questions will scare her worse." Big Tone exhaled smoke toward the sky. "Still, man, what if somebody's looking for her? A dad? A neighbor?" Reggie looked at him evenly. "If someone's looking, they'll find us soon enough." It wasn't arrogance, just fact. A pack of Harleys didn't go unnoticed in a small town. As the others dispersed to their rooms, Reggie lingered, staring down the empty road that led back to Highway 47. He felt the pull of it, the invisible thread that always tied him to whatever story waited in the dark. The road had given him peace once. Now it gave him a purpose he didn't ask for. Somewhere out there was a mother who screamed for her child and a man whose anger had filled the trees. Reggie didn't believe in coincidences. The road didn't deal in accidents, it dealt in reckonings. Inside, Maya sat beside the bed while Talia slept. The child's breathing came shallow and uneven, her small hand still gripping the stuffed rabbit. Maya watched her chest rise and fall and felt something stir that she hadn't felt in years, an ache older than fear, the ache of someone who once promised to protect and failed. She whispered a prayer she barely remembered, then turned off the TV that glowed silently in the corner. Outside, the engines cooled and the night deepened. Morning came slowly, gray light leaking through thin curtains. Reggie woke before the others, brewed motel coffee that tasted like burnt rainwater, and stood outside watching the fog lift off the fields. He heard Maya's door open behind him. "She didn't sleep much," she said. Reggie nodded. "Neither did I." They walked together to the parking lot where the bikes waited, lined like loyal horses. Maya leaned on one, arms folded. "You ever think maybe the road brings us the people we're supposed to help?" Reggie smiled faintly. "Yeah, just wish it didn't bring us so many that break our hearts." As the others stood awake, they planned their day. Tone would check nearby gas stations for camera footage. Jess and Lenny would talk to locals at the diner. Maya and Reggie would stay with Talia, hoping to get her talking again. It wasn't law enforcement procedure, but the iron promise didn't work by the book. They worked by instinct, by heart. They trusted that sometimes doing what's right meant stepping into the gray before the blue lights arrived. Back inside the room, Talia sat on the bed, small feet dangling. Her eyes tracked Reggie's every movement with quiet suspicion, but she didn't flinch this time when he spoke. "Morning, kiddo," he said gently. "Hungry?" She nodded. He handed her a small pack of muffins. Maya knelt beside her. "Talia, we're gonna try to find your mama, okay? We won't stop till we do." The girl looked up, a flicker of hope breaking through the fog in her gaze. "Promise?" Maya smiled. "Promise." Outside, the bikes gleamed under the rising sun, and the air smelled of gasoline, coffee, and something that almost felt like faith. For the Iron Promise, rides usually began with a destination. This time, it began with a vow. They didn't know that the road ahead would lead them into a web of secrets, or that the whisper Talia carried would unravel something far darker than they imagined. But as the engines came, alive, and the motel faded behind them, every rider felt the same chill under their ribs, that sense that the road was about to test their creed. They rode out in a single line, the sound of their engines folding into the morning air like thunder chasing a storm. And at the center of it all sat one tiny girl whose story had only begun to be told. The engines growled as the Iron Promise left the motel behind, heading back toward the highway where they had found the girl. The morning light clung low to the ground, casting long shadows that slipped between trees and telephone poles like fingers reaching for secrets. Reggie rode in front, his jaw set tight. Behind him, Maya held Talia close, the girl's small frame wrapped in a borrowed denim jacket. The road ahead shimmered faintly with heat, already alive, though the sun had barely cleared the horizon. Every mile carried them closer to the place where everything had started. They reached mile marker 88, just as the light turned golden. The patch of roadside looked ordinary now. Grass bent by the wind, a scuffed stretch of dirt, a single guardrail dented from years of neglect. But for Reggie and the others, the air still carried the memory of that night, the echo of a small voice whispering about her mother and a man. Reggie parked his bike and walked toward the guardrail. He crouched, tracing his fingers through the dirt. No footprints remained, no sign of struggle. Just the quiet hum of insects and the occasional whoosh of a distant car. Maya knelt beside him, resting a gentle hand on Talia's shoulder. "This where she was?" she asked softly. The girl nodded, eyes wide but dry. "You remember anything else, baby?" Maya asked. Talia's gaze flickered toward the trees across the road. She didn't answer at first. Then she whispered, "He was mad." "Who was mad, sweetheart?" Maya pressed gently. "The man," Talia said. "Mama told me don't talk, don't make a sound." Her small voice wavered like wind through tall grass. She said, "Run to the road, someone will find you." Then I heard her scream. The bikers exchanged glances. The woods stretched deep beyond the guardrail, dense and unwelcoming. Reggie straightened up, scanning the shadows. "All right," he said, "we'll take a look." Maya shook her head slightly. "You think it's safe?" He gave her a look that wasn't about bravery, it was about duty. "We can't leave not knowing." Big Tone and Jace followed him as they stepped over the guardrail. The air changed immediately, cooler, heavier, damp with the smell of pine needles and decay. Their boots crunched softly through the underbrush. 100 yards in, the forest swallowed the sound of the highway completely. Reggie's instincts twitched. Years of search and rescue work had taught him how silence could lie. He stopped, kneeling to examine the ground. There, faint impressions in the dirt, barefoot tracks smaller than his hand. He followed them until they disappeared near a tree where the bark had been scraped. Something metallic caught the light. He reached down, brushed away leaves, and found a small silver bracelet bent out of shape. It was tiny, child-sized. He slipped it into his pocket. "Reggie," Jace called softly, "you might want to see this." He turned. A few feet away, near a fallen log, the earth had been disturbed recently. A patch of darker soil, uneven, like something had been dragged. The three men stared, none speaking the word they were all thinking. Reggie crouched and pressed his palm to the dirt. It was cold but not fresh, maybe a day old, maybe more. He looked back toward the edge of the trees where Maya waited with Talia. The child's face was pale, her small fingers twisting the sleeve of Maya's jacket. Reggie's heart tightened. "Let's get her back to town," he said quietly. "Then we call this in." They returned to the road. Talia's eyes followed them, searching their faces for answers they didn't have. Reggie knelt beside her, pulling the bracelet from his pocket. "You recognize this baby?" She stared at it for a long time, then nodded. "Mama's." Maya's breath caught. "You sure?" "She never took it off," Talia said. Her lower lip trembled, but no tears came. It was as if she had cried them all already. Reggie closed his hand. Around the bracelet, the cool metal biting into his skin. "We'll find her," he said, the promise heavy as a vow. They headed back toward Eldridge. The mood changed from cautious hope to grim purpose. The bikers rode in silence, engines low, eyes scanning every passing mile of trees and fences. By the time they reached town, word had already spread. The waitress from the diner stood outside, apron still on, talking to a deputy. She saw them pull up and pointed. The officer, a tall man with weathered skin and mirrored sunglasses, approached as Reggie dismounted. "You the one found the kid?" he asked. "Yeah," Reggie said evenly. "She was alone by the highway." The deputy nodded slowly, looking at Talia, who clung to Maya's leg. "You called this in last night?" Reggie's jaw tightened. "Not yet. We wanted to make sure she was safe first." The deputy frowned. "That's not how it works. You find the child out there, you report it." His tone carried more irritation than concern. Maya stepped forward. She was scared. We didn't want to throw her in some interrogation room while she's still shaking. The man sighed, clearly not in the mood for explanations. "All right, I'll take it from here." He crouched down, forcing a smile. "Hey there, sweetheart. You remember your last name?" Talia froze. Her grip on Maya's hand tightened. She shook her head, eyes wide. "It's okay," Maya said quickly, crouching to meet her gaze. "He's just here to help, baby." But Talia didn't move. Her voice came out barely a whisper. "Don't go with him." The deputy blinked. "What's that, honey?" "He had a badge too," she said. The words stopped everyone cold. Reggie felt the air drained from his chest. "What do you mean, Talia?" he asked carefully. "The man," she whispered. "He had a badge like his." The deputy's expression flickered, something between confusion and defensiveness. "Now hold on," he said. "You think one of us?" Reggie stood, his voice steady but hard. "Nobody's accusing. but we're gonna handle this careful. The deputy straightened, adjusting his belt. You can't just keep her, he said. She's evidence now. The phrase made Maya's blood run cold. She's a child, not evidence, she snapped. Reggie stepped between them, his height casting a long shadow across the deputy's boots. We'll bring her to the station ourselves. You ride ahead and tell your boss we're coming. The man hesitated, then nodded stiffly and walked back to his cruiser. As he pulled away, Reggie turned to the others. We're not letting her out of our sight, he said. They followed the cruiser through town, keeping distance. The sheriff's office was a squat brick building that looked older than the town itself. Inside, the air smelled of coffee and paper and something metallic. The sheriff, a woman in her 50s with sharp eyes, met them at the door. You must be the folks who found the girl, she said. Her voice carried authority without arrogance. Name's Sheriff Darlene Pike. Reggie nodded. Yeah, she's called Talia. The sheriff crouched, softening her tone. Hey there, honey, you okay? Talia nodded, but said nothing. All right, Pike said, standing. Let's get her some food. We'll take her statement when she's ready. As they waited in the lobby, Maya leaned toward Reggie. You think she meant it? About the badge? I think, he said quietly. Kids don't lie. About fear. A few minutes later, Pike returned. We got a report that might connect, she said. A woman matching her mother's description was seen arguing with a man at a gas station up near 47 yesterday afternoon. Security footage is grainy, but there's a blue pickup, old model. Reggie exchanged a look with Tone. You said you were checking stations, he said. Tone nodded. That's the one I was headed to next. Pike handed Reggie a photo print. The image showed a blurred figure of a woman near a pump, a child at her side, and a man in a dark jacket. The timestamp matched the night before. Maya studied the photo, then looked at Talia. Is that her, baby? Your mama? Talia's small hand trembled as she touched the paper. Yes, she whispered. That's her. And him. You know him? Reggie asked. He used to come to our house, she said. Mama said he helped people, but she was scared of him. Did he have a name? She shook her head. She called him Sir. The room fell silent. Sheriff Pike rubbed her temples. We'll put out a bolo on the truck, she said. But if he's got law enforcement ties, this might get tricky. Reggie's voice was low but firm. Then we'll help you find him. The sheriff looked at the patch on his vest, then back at his eyes. Whatever she saw, they convinced her. All right, she said. But you play it straight. No cowboy stuff. Reggie nodded, but his mind was already ahead, tracing the road north in his imagination, past the highway, past the woods, toward whatever truth lay waiting in the shadows. Behind him, Talia clutched the stuffed rabbit again. What did you whisper to him, baby? Maya asked softly. The girl looked up, eyes distant. I told him God was watching. The words landed like a spark in dry grass. Even the sheriff paused, her breath catching. Maya's heart thudded in her chest. That whisper, so simple, so pure, had been enough to stop a grown man cold. And now, as Reggie turned toward the door, he knew the whisper wasn't the end of the story. It was the beginning of something much larger, something the road had been leading them to all along. The sheriff's office emptied out slowly as dusk began to creep back across the small Alabama town. The bikers lingered near the parking lot, leaning against their bikes, smoke curling from half-burned cigarettes while the engines cooled in the evening air. Talia sat on the steps, wrapped in a blanket that Maya had borrowed from the station. Her eyes stayed fixed on the horizon, watching cars pass by, as though any one of them might suddenly stop and bring her mother back. The others watched her in silence, each of them trying to process the story she'd told and the picture they'd seen. There was a woman, there was a man, there was a blue pickup truck, and somewhere between those pieces was a truth no one wanted to speak aloud yet. Reggie crouched beside her, resting one hand on his knee. "You're safe here, baby girl," he said quietly. "We're gonna find your mama, no matter what." She nodded without looking up. The wind shifted, carrying the smell of rain from somewhere far off. It smelled like change, and it reminded Reggie that stories like this rarely ended clean. They stayed at the small safe house the sheriff arranged, a decommissioned church on the edge of town that volunteers used for temporary shelter. The Iron Promise set up camp there, sleeping in shifts, their bikes parked like sentries around the building. At night, the air filled with the soft hum of cicadas and the faint sound of a child's restless dreams. Talia spoke little, but every once in a while she whispered fragments, half sentences, names, pieces of songs her mother used to hum. Maya kept a small notebook writing down everything. Each detail felt like a breadcrumb that might one day lead them to the truth. By the third day, the sheriff called them back to her office. "We got a lead on that blue pickup," she said, tapping a stack of reports. "Was spotted 20 miles north, near an abandoned quarry. Belongs to a man named Charles Linton. Used to work as a county security contractor before he disappeared 6 months ago." She slid the file across the desk. "Not much else on him. Couple of complaints for excessive force, but nothing stuck." Reggie studied the photo in the file. The man's eyes were pale and flat, like glass over ice. "That him?" he asked Talia, who stood beside Maya's chair. She stared at the picture for a long moment before nodding once. "Yes." Sheriff Pike sighed. "I'll send a couple of my deputies to check the quarry. You folks, stay put." Reggie looked up. "We'll ride behind, at a distance." The sheriff frowned, then saw there was no use arguing. "Fine," she said. "Just don't get in the way." The quarry sat at the end of a dirt road that twisted through the woods, silent except for the rattle of cicadas and the low growl of engines. When they reached the clearing, the air was thick with dust. An old trailer stood crooked near the edge, its windows boarded, its doors swinging loose. The deputies parked ahead, their radios crackling. Reggie's crew hung back watching. The deputies moved carefully, flashlights slicing through the gloom. Then one of them shouted, "Over here!" Everyone converged on the sound. Behind the trailer, the ground dipped into a hollow where an old pickup sat half buried in weeds. Its paint had faded to a ghost of blue, but the license plate matched. The driver's door was open. Inside, the seat was stained with something dark and old. There were toys scattered on the floorboard, cheap plastic animals, a broken hair clip, and a photo. Maya picked it up carefully. It was Talia and her mother, smiling in front of a small white house. On the back, in faded pen, someone had written, "For my little girl, no matter what happens." Before anyone could speak, one of the deputies called out again. They found something near. The tree line, a shallow pit, freshly disturbed, half hidden under a tarp. The sheriff's face hardened as they uncovered what lay beneath. A woman, lifeless, her arms folded around nothing but air. The bracelet Reggie had found was missing. Maya dropped to her knees, tears blurring her vision. Reggie turned away, jaw tight, eyes burning. He had seen death before, but this was different. This was the story they'd walked into, the one they couldn't ride away from. The sheriff placed a hand on his shoulder. "We'll find him," she said quietly. "I swear we will." Reggie nodded, but his mind was already elsewhere, on Talia, on the whisper that had stopped. A man in his tracks, on the promise that no one should have to keep alone. That night, back at the church, he sat outside watching the horizon fade. Talia came out quietly and stood beside him. "She's gone, isn't she?" she asked. Reggie didn't answer right away. "She's resting now, baby. She's not scared anymore. The girl looked up at the stars. She said, "When I'm scared, I should listen. God talks in quiet." Reggie swallowed hard. "Your mama was right. Oh, she said people like you would come," Talia whispered. He turned to her, surprised. "She said that?" "She said the road has angels on wheels." Reggie felt something shift inside him then, a kind of peace that hurt as much as it healed. He looked at her small face lit by the starlight and knew what they had to do. They couldn't change what had happened, but they could make sure the man who did it never hurt anyone again. The Iron Promise rode out before dawn, engines growling low, headlights cutting through fog. They followed the trail the sheriff's team left behind. Tire tracks, reports of sightings, whispers from locals. Each mile felt heavier than the last. When they finally found him, it wasn't in some dramatic showdown. It was at a roadside diner. 2 towns over, the man was sitting alone at a corner booth, his badge still clipped to his belt, his hands shaking over a cup of coffee. He didn't look up when Reggie stepped through the door, but somehow he knew. "You're the one," Reggie said quietly. The man's shoulders stiffened. "She shouldn't have run." Reggie's voice didn't rise. "She shouldn't have had to." For a moment, the only sound was the hum of the ceiling fan. Then the man looked up, eyes dull, and said, "The girl? What did she tell you?" Reggie leaned closer. "She said God was watching." The words landed like judgment. The man's face went white. His hand twitched toward his sidearm, but the sheriff's deputies were already there, stepping from the shadows. Darlene Pike had followed them, just as Reggie suspected she would. As the man was led away, he muttered under his breath, "I thought nobody'd ever know." Reggie watched in silence. Outside, the sun broke over the horizon, turning the asphalt gold. A week later, the town gathered at a small cemetery just outside Eldridge. The Iron Promise stood together behind Talia as the pastor spoke. Maya held her hand. When the service ended, Talia placed the stuffed rabbit beside the stone. It looked small against the grass, but it was everything she had left. Reggie knelt beside her. "You okay, little one?" She nodded slowly. "She's home now." He smiled faintly. "So are you." Months passed, but the memory of that ride never faded. The Iron Promise kept in touch with Talia through Maya, who took legal guardianship. The girl grew stronger, her laughter returning slowly like sunlight through clouds. Every now and then, Reggie would ride back to mile marker 88. He'd stop his bike, take off his helmet, and listen. The wind always whispered through the pines, soft and steady. Some nights, he swore he could hear a woman's voice in it, a voice that said, "Thank you." And when the road stretched empty before him, he'd think about how one small child had reminded them all that sometimes angels don't fall from the sky. Sometimes they crawl out of the dirt, barefoot and afraid, waiting for the sound of engines to bring them home. Weeks drifted into months, and life began to rebuild itself around the ashes of what had happened. The town of Eldridge carried on with its quiet rhythm trucks at dawn, diner coffee. Steaming in cracked mugs, the distant hum of trains that always sounded like they were headed somewhere better. But for the Iron Promise, the world no longer looked the same. Every ride felt different now, charged with memory. The road that had once been an escape had become a reminder, a sacred line tying them to a little girl who had changed everything. Reggie found himself riding slower these days. He said it was to keep the group together, but the truth was he'd learned to see more. Every face at the gas station, every child at the crossing, every small detail of life. They all looked like pieces of something fragile he didn't want to miss again. He'd go back to mile marker 88 sometimes, the same stretch of asphalt where the world had split open that night. He never stayed long. He'd just cut the engine, let the wind breathe around him, and listen. Sometimes the silence felt like a prayer, and sometimes it felt like forgiveness. Maya stayed in Eldridge for good. She rented a small house with a porch that faced the hills and filled it with color curtains that caught the light, photos that told stories. And Talia lived there, too, her laughter slowly replacing the quiet that had once haunted the rooms. School came easy to her. She was bright, curious, stubborn in all the ways that reminded Maya of herself. The first time she came home with a drawing of a motorcycle under a big sun, Maya framed it and hung it by the door. Reggie came by once a month with the crew. They'd park the bikes in the yard, bring groceries, fix the fence, eat too much, and tell the kind of stories that make the soul lighter. The Iron Promise was still a club, but now it was also a family in the truest sense. They didn't just ride for the road anymore. They rode for what the road could still save. The sheriff stopped by sometimes too. Darlene Pike had grown softer around the edges after the case. She'd seen too much in her years, but this story stuck to her like a lesson she didn't want to forget. She'd sit on Maya's porch with a cup of coffee and listen to Talia talk about school or the stories she liked to read. One afternoon, as the sun went down and cicadas sang from the trees, the sheriff looked at Maya and said, "You ever think maybe that little girl saved all of us?" Maya smiled, the corners of her eyes creasing. "Every day," she said. As for Talia, she grew, but she never forgot. On her 7th birthday, she asked Reggie to take her for a ride. He hesitated. She was still small, and he'd spent his life keeping danger at arm's length. But she looked up at him with that same calm certainty that her mother once must have had. "I'll be careful," she promised. So he did what felt right. He wrapped her in a jacket that was twice her size, adjusted the helmet until it nearly swallowed her head, and lifted her onto the seat in front of him. When the engine started, she gasped, then laughed. A clear, pure sound that cut straight through the weight of memory. They rode slow through the hills, the world rushing by in colors and wind. She raised her hands once, feeling the freedom of it, the air like an embrace. Reggie smiled behind his helmet. For the first time in a long while, the road felt like healing again. Back at the house, Maya waited on the porch, a mix of pride and worry in her eyes. When they returned, Talia jumped off the bike and ran straight into her arms. "I wasn't scared," she said proudly. Maya held her close. "I know, baby, you're brave like your mama." Talia pulled back, serious suddenly. "Mama's with the angels, right?" Maya nodded. "She is." Talia smiled, small but sure. "Then I'm not alone when I ride." That night, when the sky turned the color of memory, Reggie sat with Maya and watched fireflies blink across the yard. "You think she remembers it all?" he asked quietly. Maya shook her head. "Not the pain, just the love that came after. Kids have a way of keeping what's good and letting the rest fade." Reggie nodded, staring at the stars. "That's something grown folks could learn from." They sat in silence a while longer, the sound of the crickets rising like a hymn. Time went on, and the story of the tiny black girl found crying beside the highway became one. Of those tales the town told in whispers, half tragedy, half miracle. People said it changed something about Eldridge. The sheriff said folks started looking out for each other more. The diner put up a small plaque near the counter that read, "For Talia's mother, no one forgotten." Truckers passing through would see it and ask, "Who's Talia?" And the waitress would smile and say, "The reason this town still has a heart." When Talia turned 10, the Iron Promise organized a charity ride in her mother's memory. Hundreds of bikers showed up from all across the state, some who'd only heard the story, some who'd been there that night. They rode from the church where they'd once taken shelter, all the way to the highway, stopping at mile marker 88. Talia stood there with Maya and Reggie, a bouquet of wildflowers in her hands. The air shimmered with the sound of engines idling, 100 heartbeats beating in unison. She laid the flowers by the guardrail and whispered, "Thank you, Mama." When she turned, every biker revved their engine once in salute, a thunder of respect that roared across the hills like a benediction. Years later, when Talia was grown, she would still ride, not as a member of any club, but in spirit. She became a counselor, working with children who had lived through the same kind of shadows she had. On her office wall hung a photo, the iron promise lined up beside a little girl with a shy smile and a stuffed rabbit in her arms. Beneath it was a single line, written in her mother's handwriting, "God is watching." It reminded her every day that even the smallest voices could change the world if someone just stopped long enough to listen. And for Reggie, Maya, and the rest of the Iron Promise, the road never ended. It only looped back, teaching them over and over what they'd learned that night, that sometimes salvation doesn't come with sirens or spotlights. Sometimes it comes on the quiet stretch of a lonely highway, in the form of a trembling child who forces you to see that mercy and courage still exist in this world. And if you're lucky enough to hear a whisper like hers, you don't ignore it. You stop. You listen. You promise. And then, when the engines start again and the wind hits your face, you ride. Not to escape, but to carry that promise forward, mile after mile, until every road has heard her name. Years rolled by like the lines of the highway that had carried their story forward. The Iron Promise grew older, their hair silvering beneath helmets, their hearts a little softer, their rides a little slower. Time has a way of sanding down even the sharpest memories, but not all of them fade. Some stay etched in the bones, like the vibration of the road that lingers long after the engine stops. For Reggie, Talia's story became that vibration, something he could still feel even when he stood still. He left Eldridge eventually, but he never really left what happened there. Every year, without fail, he returned on the same date, early autumn, when the air was cool enough to remind him of that first night. He'd park near the same guardrail, leave a small handful of wildflowers, and sit there listening to the hum of distant cars. He never stayed long, never said much. Sometimes he thought he heard the faint echo of laughter, the sound of a child's voice whispering on the wind. Maya stayed though. Eldridge was her home now, and she built a life that carried Talia's light forward. She turned the little house into something bigger, a halfway home for kids who had nowhere else to go, called the Open Road Shelter. The sign out front was painted with a motorcycle wheel tangled in roots, the same symbol that had once been stitched on the backs of the Iron Promise. She said it stood for strength and belonging, for never leaving anyone behind. And people came, kids who'd seen too much, families trying to rebuild, drifters who'd lost their way. Maya gave them food, warmth, and a place to breathe. Every evening, she sat on the porch, watching the sun sink behind the hills, waiting for the sound of engines that sometimes still rolled through like ghosts. Talia grew into a woman who carried both her mother's fire and Maya's calm. She studied hard, worked harder, and turned her pain into purpose. When she graduated college, she sent Reggie a photo, a smiling young woman in a cap and gown standing beside a motorcycle. On the back, she'd written, "You taught me how to ride through fear." It was the proudest letter he'd ever received. He kept it folded in the pocket of his leather jacket, the edges worn soft from years of opening it again and again. The Iron Promise changed too. Some members moved away, some passed on, but the club never died. It just evolved. New faces joined, drawn by the legend of the riders who had found a little girl beside a highway and turned tragedy into hope. They carried the same code. No one left behind, not on the road, not in life. At every gathering, they told the story again. The night they stopped, the whisper that froze a man's heart, the promise they made that still guided their rides. For younger bikers, it was a myth, something almost holy. For Reggie, it was memory, raw and real as the scar on his hand. From that night, he dug through the dirt to find the bracelet that started it all. Years later, when Talia opened a center for trauma counseling, she named it Highway 88. People ask why, and she always smiled softly. "Because that's where I found my family," she'd say. The sign out front bore a simple motto: every voice heard. She didn't tell most people the full story, not out of shame, but out of reverence. Some memories she knew didn't need retelling. They just needed honoring. On the 50th anniversary of that night, Maya organized one last memorial ride. Bikers came from every corner of the country. The convoy stretched for miles, engines thundering, flags fluttering, chrome glinting under the sun. At the front rode Reggie, gray-bearded now, but steady. Beside him, on her own bike, rode Talia. The wind whipped through her hair, and for a moment, time folded back on itself. They stopped at mile marker 88 again. This time, the place wasn't haunting, it was sacred. Someone had built a small monument there, a plaque engraved with a single line. She told him God was watching. Beneath it lay fresh flowers, placed by strangers who knew the story only from whispers passed down between riders. Talia stood in front of the plaque, tracing the words with her fingers. "Do you ever think about her?" she asked quietly. "Every day," Reggie said. "But now when I do, it don't hurt so bad. Feels more like, gratitude." Talia smiled faintly. Mama would have liked that. They stood in silence for a long time. The other bikers lingered behind them, engines idling softly, the sound low and reverent. Maya placed her hand on Talia's shoulder. "You ready to ride, baby?" Alia nodded. "Always." They climbed back onto their bikes, and the convoy moved as one, the road rising before them like an open promise. The sun hung low, painting everything gold, and the wind carried the faint scent of pine and memory. As they rode, Reggie looked over at Talia, her hair whipping behind her, her eyes bright with the kind of peace he'd been chasing his whole life. He realized then that the road had given him more than redemption. It had given him legacy. The girl he'd found crying beside the highway was now leading the way, her story carrying forward on two wheels and faith. When the convoy reached the top of the hill, Reggie slowed, letting her take the lead. She raised her hand briefly, a salute, a thank you, a goodbye. And then the whole group thundered over the rise, engines roaring in harmony. The sound rolled out across the fields like thunder, like freedom, like prayer. That night, when the stars rose and the world went quiet again, the highway looked just as it always had, empty, endless, waiting. Somewhere, a child's laughter echoed faintly through the wind. Maybe it was memory, maybe something more. Either way, Reggie smiled, knowing the promise they made still lived out there in the dark, carried by riders who'd never forget the tiny black girl who whispered a truth so powerful it changed every soul who heard it. And as long as the road stretched on, as long as engines turned and hearts kept faith, her voice would never fade. And so, the legend of that night became more than a story. It became a compass for every rider who ever touched the open road with something broken inside. People came to know about the iron promise, not for their noise, but for their silence. The kind of silence that listens, that stops when others keep going. Reggie rode into his later years with the steady dignity of man who had seen the worst of humanity and still chosen to believe in its grace. When he finally hung up his jacket, the patch black leather with silver roots was faded, but its meaning burned brighter than ever. He handed it to Talia one quiet morning on Maya's porch. She held it with both hands like a relic, her voice barely a whisper. "You kept your promise," she said. Reggie smiled, his eyes soft with age. "No," he said, "we kept it, all of us." He tapped her heart. "Now it's your road." She leaned in and hugged him, the sound of cicadas filling the air like a benediction. Not long after, Reggie passed peacefully in his sleep, his bike parked by the window, a half-finished cup of coffee on the table. The town turned out in droves for his memorial. The sheriff, gray now but unbroken, gave the eulogy. "He was a man who believed the road could heal," she said. "And he was right, because it healed us." At the graveside, Maya stood beside Talia, tears and pride blending quietly. When the engine started, hundreds of them, the sound rose like thunder rolling over the hills. It wasn't a farewell, it was a salute. Talia took over the Iron Promise after that, though she changed the name to something new. The Road Keepers. It was more than a club now. It was a network of riders who looked out for children in danger, who patrolled forgotten highways, who delivered supplies to small towns after storms, who stopped when everyone else sped by. They carried Reggie's creed, "No one left behind." The story of the girl by the highway became their founding myth, a reminder of what compassion looked like when it rode on two wheels. One summer afternoon, years later, Talia rode back to mile marker 88 again. The sun was high, and the pines whispered with that familiar southern rhythm. She parked her bike, cut the engine, and stood there for a while, the silence humming around her like a heartbeat. The plaque still gleamed, though the letters had weathered. She told him God was watching. Talia knelt and brushed away dust from the base. "You were right, Mama," she said softly. "He really was." She stayed there until the shadows grew long, listening to the quiet. Somewhere beyond the trees, a hawk cried, and the sound echoed like a hymn. When she finally stood, she smiled through the tears. She turned back toward her bike, the air warm and alive around her. Before starting the engine, she looked down the endless stretch of highway and whispered one last time, "Thank you for finding me." The wind caught the words and carried them forward, down the road, over the fields, through towns she hadn't yet seen. She kicked the engine to life. The bike roared, and she took off slow at first, then faster, the speed wrapping around her like memory. Each mile felt lighter, each turn like a heartbeat sinking to something divine. The world blurred into motion, and she felt her mother's spirit riding beside her. Maya's laughter in her ear, Reggie's voice steady and low, "The road remembers." As the sun dipped low behind her, Talia raised one hand to the sky, palm open, and let the wind rush through her fingers. Ahead, the road stretched forever, an unbroken promise written in asphalt and grace. And in that moment, the story came full circle. The tiny black girl who once wept beside the highway was no longer lost. She had become the road itself, a living whisper, a promise carried on every engine that ever dared to stop, to listen, and to believe that mercy still had a place in this world. Years passed, and the Iron Promise evolved into something larger than any of them had imagined. What started as a brotherhood bound by asphalt and redemption had grown into a movement that reached far beyond Alabama's borders. The riders called themselves the Road Keepers now, a name Talia chose to honor the road that had saved her life and the people who had kept her safe when the world turned cold. What began with a handful of bikers had multiplied into hundreds across states, each patch stitched with the same emblem Reggie once wore, a silver wheel entangled in roots, symbolizing the promise that no soul, no story, no child would ever be left behind again. Talia rode at the front now. She had inherited Reggie's quiet resolve and Maya's compassion, tempered by her own fierce spirit. Every mile she rode carried pieces of those who came before her. When her engine rumbled, she could almost hear Reggie's laughter, feel Maya's guiding hand, and see her mother's face reflected in the rearview mirror. She wasn't the scared little girl who'd clung to a stranger's jacket anymore. She was a leader, a healer, a survivor who had turned trauma into purpose. The road keepers didn't just ride, they acted. They built safe houses in forgotten towns, funded community outreach programs, and partnered with schools to teach safety and empathy to kids who grew up feeling invisible. They organized charity rides that raised thousands for domestic violence shelters and orphan programs. Every event began the same way, with a moment of silence for the girl by the highway. No one ever said her name out loud, but they all knew it. Her story was sacred, retold in the hum of every engine and the pulse of every ride. On the 10th anniversary of that fateful night, Talia was invited to speak at a national biker convention in Atlanta. Standing on the stage before a crowd of hundreds, she wore her mother's bracelet, the one Reggie had found buried under the pine needles all those years ago. She touched it before she spoke, as if drawing courage from the memory. Her voice was calm, but it carried the kind of weight that made people stop and listen. 10 years ago, she began, a group of strangers found me on the side of a highway. They didn't know who I was, and they didn't ask what I could give them. They stopped because it was right. Because sometimes stopping is all it takes to change a life. The crowd fell silent. What you ride for matters, she continued. Not just the road beneath you, but the people you meet along the way. Every mile tells a story. Every stop can save one. When she finished, the room erupted in applause. Many wiped away tears. Others simply nodded, engines revving in salute outside the building. That night, hundreds of bikers took to the streets of Atlanta in an organized memorial ride. Their headlights filled the city like fireflies, tracing constellations through the dark. At the front rode Talia, her face steady, her mother's bracelet glinting in the lights. Maya watched the live broadcast from Eldridge, tears shining in her eyes. Her small shelter had become something bigger, too. The open roadhouse was now a network of homes across 3 states, each one run by someone who had once been helped there. Her walls were covered with photos. Kids who had grown into strong, kind adults, families reunited, lives reclaimed. Every photo was proof that what they'd done all those years ago had been more than a rescue. It had been the planting of a seed. When Talia returned to Eldridge after the convention, she went straight to the church-turned-shelter where everything began. The place was quieter now, filled mostly with laughter and the smell of cornbread and coffee. Maya greeted her at the door, older but still carrying that same unshakable calm. They embraced for a long time, the kind of hug that says everything words can't. "You did it," Maya whispered. "You turned the pain into something beautiful." Talia smiled. "We did it," she said. "You, Reggie, all of them. You saved me. I just carried it forward." That night, after everyone else had gone to bed, Talia sat alone on the porch. The stars hung low, bright as they'd been the night her world changed. She thought about her mother, how her last act had been one of pure courage, pushing her daughter toward safety even as danger closed in. She thought about the whisper that had stopped a man cold, the words that had outlived fear itself. She touched her bracelet and whispered them again. God is watching. It wasn't fear anymore, it was faith, a reminder that even in darkness, someone is always listening. The next morning, She woke before dawn and wheeled her bike into the yard. She ran her fingers along the handlebars, feeling the chill of the metal, the heartbeat of 1,000 rides humming beneath the surface. Maya stepped out onto the porch, coffee in hand. "Going somewhere?" she asked, with a knowing smile. Talia grinned. "Yeah, I think it's time." Maya nodded. "You'll come back?" "Always," Talia said. She strapped on her helmet, started the engine, and felt the world stir awake around her. The sound was low and steady, like a pulse returning after sleep. As she poured onto the highway, the wind hit her face and carried her forward into the rising light. Every turn of the wheel felt like a prayer, every mile like a heartbeat sinking to the rhythm of something greater. Behind her, the town of Eldridge disappeared into the horizon, but its spirit rode with her. She wasn't running anymore, she was answering a call. Down the road, she'd meet others, riders who'd lost, riders who'd loved, riders still searching. Each of them would hear her story in pieces, in rumors, in the soft hush of a legend that grew bigger with every telling. Some would call her the girl from the highway, others would call her the angel of Route 88. She never corrected them. She just smiled, shook their hands, and kept riding. Because the truth was, she wasn't the story anymore. She was the echo of it, the living reminder that sometimes even the smallest voice can save the loudest hearts. The road keepers continued to grow, spreading far beyond what any of them had planned. They didn't recruit, they inspired. They didn't advertise, they acted. They became the kind of force that didn't need recognition, only purpose. Wherever there was a stretch of lonely highway, wherever someone was stranded, lost, or forgotten, the sound of engines would one day roll through, steady and strong. And somewhere in that sound, faint but eternal, was the whisper that started it all. That marked the birth of the modern roadkeepers movement, a legacy carved not in steel or fame, but in mercy. It was no longer just about the iron promise or the bikers who had stopped one night. It was about the power of compassion, the courage to pause, and the belief that even on the darkest road, light can still find its way home. And years later, when time had softened everything but the truth, the story still lived on past. From rider to rider, whispered in roadside bars, printed in newsletters, shared around campfires that burned low and long beside sleeping motorcycles. Some told it like folklore, others swore it was gospel. The details shifted with the telling, but the heart of it never changed. A tiny black girl, alone by a highway, found by a circle of strangers who refused to look away. For those who rode, it wasn't just a tale, it was a creed. When you heard that story, you understood what the road demanded of you. You stopped, you listened, you helped. By then, Talia had become something of a legend herself. The road keepers had chapters in nearly every southern state, each one carrying her emblem, the wheel wrapped in roots on their jackets. But she stayed humble. Fame had never been the point. The road doesn't care about names, she would tell new riders. It only remembers what you do. She kept the same bike, the same jacket, the same bracelet her mother once wore, though she'd added a patch to the back, a small embroidered line that read, "Mile 88, never forget." On the 20th anniversary of that night, she returned again to the place where it all began. The sun was low, the light honey-colored, the air still and quiet except for the faint rustle of trees. The plaque was still there, polished and cared for. Someone, maybe a stranger, maybe one of her riders, had placed fresh lilies beside it. Talia parked her bike and sat in the grass, tracing her fingers along the engraved words. She'd been there dozens of times, but it always felt like the first. The memory came back sharp as ever. The sound of engines stopping, the smell of dust and fear. Maya's voice saying, "It's okay, baby." She closed her eyes and breathed in deeply. When she opened them, she wasn't alone. A small convoy of bikes had pulled over behind her, young riders, faces she didn't recognize but whose jackets carried the same patch. They approached quietly, respectful. One of them, a woman barely in her 20s, stepped forward. "Ma'am," she said, "we didn't mean to interrupt. We just wanted to say thank you. My brother told me your story when I joined, said it changed how he saw the road." Talia smiled. "That story don't belong to me," she said softly. "It belongs to everyone who still believes in stopping." The young woman nodded, eyes bright. "Still, it means something to us, to me." She hesitated, then added, "Would it be all right if we rode with you a while?" Talia's smile widened. "I'd like that." They rode together as the sun slipped lower, the sound of their engines blending into one long, steady hum that seemed to carry the weight of the years with it. The air smelled of pine and dust and something holy. For a moment, it felt like Reggie and Maya were right there too, just ahead, leading the way. They stopped at the edge of a hill where the highway stretched endlessly toward the horizon. The younger riders dismounted, chatting quietly among themselves. Talia stood apart, watching the sky turn the color of fire and then fade to indigo. "This is where it started," she said finally, "and this is where it keeps going." She looked at the faces around her, black, white, young, old, women and men, all drawn together by the same simple belief that mercy could move on two wheels. When darkness settled, they lit a small lantern and set it beside the road. It glowed faintly, golden against the night, and as the wind brushed through the grass, it flickered like a heartbeat. "What's the light for?" one of the younger riders asked. Talia looked down the long black ribbon of highway. "For the ones who still need to be found," she said. They stood there for a while, the night deep and silent except for the hum of crickets and the distant call of an owl. Then, one by one, the riders climbed back on their bikes. Talia was last. She glanced once more at the lantern and then at the road ahead. "Let's ride," she said. As they took off, the lantern's glow grew smaller and smaller until it was just a dot swallowed by the dark. But its light didn't die. It became part of the rhythm of the engines, part of the breath of the riders, part of the story that would keep being told for as long as wheels touched asphalt. Back in Eldridge, Maya's shelter still stood, though she had long since passed on. A new generation ran it now. People who'd been children there once, now adults with families of their own. A framed photo of Maya and Reggie hung by the door, and beneath it a quote was painted. In careful script, "Sometimes God sends help on two wheels." The townsfolk called it the Miracle House, though no miracle had ever been claimed, just compassion and timing, and the courage of those who refused to ignore a whisper. In every town touched by the roadkeepers, similar stories began to appear. Lost kids reunited with families, stranded travelers given help, old feuds ended through unexpected kindness. The legend had turned into an invisible network of good. Nobody claimed credit, nobody needed to. It was enough that the work was being done. And somewhere out there, whenever the world seemed to forget, a convoy of bikes would appear in the distance, engines low, headlights steady, carrying with them the memory of one small voice that had once said, "God is watching." It was no longer just a warning. It was a reminder that even in the loneliest corners of life, someone was still looking, still listening, still ready to stop. The road stretched on, endless and eternal, its hum like a heartbeat under the sky. And in that rhythm lived a promise that kindness never dies, it just changes riders. And when the seasons turned once more, the legend of the girl by the highway had already crossed oceans. The story of the Iron Promise and the Road Keepers had been written about in magazines, featured in short documentaries, and whispered in biker bars from Alabama to South Africa. Yet no retelling ever truly captured the heart of it. The way the air had felt that night when Reggie stopped, or the way the whisper had carried power far beyond its size. Those who'd lived it knew the truth. It wasn't just a story about a rescue. It was about rebirth, about how one moment of mercy can ripple across decades and landscapes. Talia never cared for the attention. She would tell interviewers that her life wasn't a miracle, but a lesson. The word doesn't change because people talk, she'd say. It changes because people stop. She became a speaker, but her talks were more like conversations, soft, reflective, always ending with the same message. Listen to the small voices. They're the ones that save you. When she turned 40, she decided to make one last solo ride across the country, from the Gulf to the Pacific. She didn't tell anyone, not even her closest friends in the Road Keepers. She just packed a small bag, tucked her mother's bracelet into her pocket, and took to the open road at dawn. The air was cool, the sky endless. Every mile was like flipping through the pages of her life. The smell of pine near mile marker 88, the open plains where the horizon looked like eternity, the cities that rose like steel promises, the deserts that reminded her how silence could be beautiful. She stopped often, not because she had to, but because she wanted to. Each stop felt like a prayer. A small diner where she bought coffee for a stranger, a gas station where she helped a mother fix her tire, a rest stop where she sat under a streetlight and watched the stars move. She never announced who she was, never mentioned the story that made her name known among riders. To them, she was just another traveler, another guardian of the road. Somewhere in Arizona, she met a young man sitting beside a broken-down motorcycle. His hands were greasy, his face young and defeated. "Need a hand?" she asked, crouching beside him. He looked up, startled. "Yeah, I think I broke the belt." She smiled. "Good thing belts can be fixed." Together they worked, the desert wind whispering through dry grass. When the engine finally came to life again, he laughed. "You must be some kind of angel." She just shook her head. "No, just someone who's been helped before." She handed him a small patch from her jacket pocket, a wheel wrapped in roots. "Keep this," she said. "It stands for not leaving people behind." He turned it over in his hands. "What's it from?" She smiled. "A story that started on a highway." Then she climbed back on her bike and rode off before he could ask more. Later, that young man would start his own chapter of the Road Keepers, never knowing the woman who helped him was the very girl whose whisper had begun it all. Talia reached the Pacific weeks later. The ocean stretched out like the sky turned to water, vast and alive. She parked her bike on a cliff overlooking the waves and sat down in the sand, the roar of the surf filling her ears. She took out the bracelet and turned it over in her palm, tracing the worn engraving. "For my little girl, no matter what happens." The sunlight caught the metal, and for a moment, it glowed like new. She closed her eyes, breathing in salt and wind. "You were right, Mama," she whispered. "No matter what happens." As the tide came in, the waves reached her boots and then retreated, taking with them bits of old leaves and seaweed, returning them to the ocean's endless cycle. She smiled, feeling the rhythm of it all, the way life moves forward, even through pain, even through loss, until one day it becomes something gentle again. When she rode back east, she took the long way, stopping at every place that reminded her of the road's kindness, the diner in Eldridge, the church that had once been a shelter, the fields that turned gold under the southern sun. At each stop, she left something small behind: a coin, a flower, a note. Not for recognition, but as markers of gratitude, reminders that goodness had passed through here once and might again. Years later, when she grew older and her hair began to gray like Reggie's once had, she finally settled in a small cottage not far from the original highway. She still rode sometimes, slow and steady, always wearing her mother's bracelet. The road keepers still thrived, now a vast community of riders and volunteers who helped those in need. Guided by her philosophy, the road isn't just asphalt, it's the space between hearts. On quiet nights, when the air was soft and the moon hung low, she'd sit on her porch and listen to the faint hum of engines far away, riders passing through, carrying on what she began. Sometimes she'd smile, sometimes she'd cry, but always she'd whisper the same words to the wind: "Thank you for finding me." And if you drove down Highway 88 on one of those nights, if you rolled down your window and let the warm wind fill your car, you might swear you could hear it too. The echo of engines, the sound of laughter, the faintest voice of a child saying, "God is watching." It wouldn't be eerie. It would be comforting, like the earth itself remembering something good. That's the story the road keeps telling. The story of mercy born from fear, of strangers who became family, of a whisper that became a promise, carried by wheels and hearts and wind. And even now, as long as there are highways stretching into the unknown, and as long as there are people willing to stop for the lost and the small, the legend of the tiny black girl beside the highway will never fade. It will keep living, mile after mile, rider after rider, heart after heart. And even now, long after the roar of the iron promise had faded into memory, Highway 88 still carried the pulse of what began there. Truckers would sometimes slow as they passed mile. Marker 88, not because of superstition, but because of what the place had come to mean. There was a small sign there now, placed by the county, but kept clean by strangers, that read, "In honor of all who stop." Wildflowers grew thick around it, seeded each spring by locals and riders alike. The roots of those flowers ran deep into the same soil where a frightened child once sat. And every bloom seemed to echo the same quiet word: remember. Every generation of riders retold the story differently. Some said, the girl's whisper froze a killer in his tracks. Others said, her voice brought an army of bikers to their knees. But no one argued about its truth. They all agreed that the road itself had changed that night, as if something sacred had been written into its asphalt. It became the kind of story that lived inside you, shaping how you looked at the world. When storms closed in or nights grew too long, you thought about the girl by the guardrail and the people who stopped, and you rode a little slower, watched a little closer, loved a little harder. In time, the road keeper's mission outgrew even Talia's imagining. Their patches turned up in places she had never seen, in refugee camps, on volunteer medics in hurricane zones, on rescue teams clearing roads after wildfires. The emblem had become universal, the rooted wheel, the promise of motion and belonging. It no longer stood just for bikers. It stood for anyone who chose to stop, listen, and lift someone else from the edge. When Talia finally left the world she had rebuilt, she did it the way she had lived. Quietly, without ceremony. Friends found her in her sleep, a half-finished letter beside her bed. It was addressed simply to the riders. In it she wrote, "If you ever wonder whether what you do matters, remember this. Someone is still alive because you cared enough to slow down. Keep your engines warm and your hearts open. The road remembers." At her memorial ride, thousands turned out. The convoy stretched so far that from the air It looked like a river of chrome flowing through the green hills. They ended at mile marker 88, engines idling while the pastor spoke. Then, one by one, they cut their motors until the only sound was wind. For a full minute, the highway was silent. Then a single engine started, deep and low, followed by another, then 100 more. The sound rose into the sky like thunder rolling over forgiveness. And when the last light faded and the riders drifted away, the highway settled back into itself. Empty but alive, carrying beneath its tar and stone the story it had promised never to forget. So if you ever find yourself on a lonely stretch of road, maybe in the deep south, maybe somewhere far from home, and the wind begins to hum around you in that soft, knowing way, listen closely. You might hear the ghost of engines in the distance, or the echo of a small voice carried on the breeze. It will sound like faith. It will sound like home. That is where her story ends, and where every new one begins. Because mercy is still moving, mile after mile, and kindness still rides the highways of this world, looking for someone who needs to be found. And as always, if this story found you tonight, remember what Rooted Voices US stands for. Stories that ground us, voices that rise. Share this with someone who needs to be reminded that goodness is still out there, waiting just beyond the next turn. Subscribe, stay with us, and keep listening, because somewhere, even now, the road is whispering another name.